How dare you serve my family expired food? Ma'am, I assure you the food is fresh. This is completely unacceptable.
She was just 13 years old, sitting on flight 447, when she noticed something that would change everything. The flight attendant had just served her family dinner, smiling sweetly as she placed the trays down. But within minutes, that smile would turn into rage, and a simple airplane meal would expose a truth so shocking that the entire cabin would erupt in chaos. This is the story of how one young girl's courage brought a racist flight attendant to her knees. Kiana Mitchell was not your average 13-year-old. With her natural curly hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and her favorite purple glasses perched on her nose, she sat in seat 27B, wedged between her younger brother Terrell and the window. Kiana had always been observant, the kind of kid who noticed things others missed. Her teachers called her precocious. Her parents called her their little detective. But on this Tuesday evening flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles, those observational skills would prove to be more than just a quirky personality trait. Beside her sat her mother, Simone Mitchell, a pediatric nurse who had saved for 2 years to take her family on this vacation to visit her sister in California. Simone was exhausted, her scrubs replaced with comfortable travel clothes, but the fatigue of double shifts still shadowed her eyes. Next to Simone was Kiana's father, David, a high school history teacher with salt and pepper hair and hands calloused from his weekend carpentry hobby. And in the aisle seat sat 9-year-old Terrell, who had talked non-stop about Disneyland since they'd boarded 3 hours ago. The Mitchell family had scraped together every penny for this trip. It meant something to them, this vacation, this moment of normalcy and joy. They deserved it. They had earned it. But as Kiana would soon discover, not everyone on Flight 447 believed they deserved to be there. The flight attendant's name was Patricia Hendricks, though her name tag simply read, Patty. She was in her mid-50s, with bleached blonde hair styled in a tight bun and lips pressed into a permanent line of displeasure. Patricia had worked for the airline for 23 years, and in those 23 years she had developed certain opinions about certain people. Opinions that she believed were justified. Opinions that she thought she could act on without consequence. When Patricia had seen the Mitchell family board the plane, something had shifted in her expression. The smile she'd given the elderly white couple in first class vanished. The warm greeting she'd offered the young Asian businessman disappeared. Instead, her jaw tightened, and her eyes narrowed as she watched Simone help Terrell stow his backpack in the overhead compartment. Patricia had made a decision in that moment. A cruel, calculated decision. And now, 3 hours into the flight, she was about to execute her plan. The dinner service began at 7 p.m. Patricia wheeled the cart down the aisle, her practiced smile returning as she served passengers their meals. Chicken or pasta, the standard options. But when she reached row 27 where the Mitchell family sat, her hand reached not for the standard meal trays, but for a special set she'd prepared in the galley. Chicken or pasta? Patricia asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Chicken for all of us, please, Simone replied, tired but polite. Patricia placed the trays down with exaggerated care. Enjoy your meal, she said, and there was something in her tone, something sharp and satisfied, that made Kiana look up from her book. The family began to eat. Terrell immediately dug into his chicken, complaining that the mashed potatoes were cold. David peeled back the foil on his entree, wrinkling his nose at the smell but attributing it to airplane food's notorious reputation. Simone took a small bite and paused, her medical training making her more attuned to things that seemed off. But it was Kiana who stopped entirely. She hadn't even opened her meal yet. Instead, she was staring at the date stamped on the corner of the plastic wrap covering her tray. Her heart began to pound. Mom, Kiana whispered, her voice tight. Look at this. Simone leaned over and Kiana pointed to the small print on the meal packaging. Expiration date, April 15, 2023. It was now November 2024. The meals were expired by more than 18 months. Simone's eyes widened. She quickly checked her own tray, then David's, then Terrell's. Every single meal had the same expired date. She looked around at the other passengers nearby. A white couple 2 rows ahead were eating their meals without issue. She glimpsed their packaging before they discarded it. Their meals were fresh, dated from just days ago. David, Simone said quietly, her voice shaking with controlled anger. Check the dates. David examined his tray and felt his stomach turn. Not from the food he'd already swallowed, but from the realization of what this meant. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Kiana's mind was racing. She'd read about food safety in her science class. She knew that expired food, especially protein like chicken, could cause serious illness. Salmonella, E. coli, food poisoning that could put someone in the hospital. Her little brother had already eaten half his meal. "Excuse me," Simone called out, her voice cutting through the cabin noise. "Excuse me, we need to speak to a flight attendant." Patricia appeared almost immediately as if she'd been waiting. "Yes? Is there a problem?" Simone held up the meal tray. "These meals are expired. By over a year and a half. Look at the dates." Patricia glanced at the packaging with feigned surprise. "Oh, that must be a printing error. Sometimes the labels get mixed up in catering." "All 4 of our meals have the same expiration date," David interjected, his teacher's voice firm and clear. "And I noticed the passengers around us have fresh meals. This is not a printing error." A few nearby passengers began to pay attention, craning their necks to see what was happening. Patricia's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. If you'd like, I can bring you new meals." "We'd like to know why we were specifically served expired food," Simone said, her voice rising slightly. "My 9-year-old son has already eaten this. Do you understand he could get seriously ill?" Patricia's mask began to slip. "Ma'am, I don't appreciate your tone. This is a simple mistake and you're making a scene." That's when Kiana stood up. At 5'2" she was small for her age, but in that moment she felt 10 feet tall. "It's not a mistake," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You gave us expired food on purpose." The cabin went quiet. Passengers who had been watching their screens or reading their books now turned their full attention to row 27. Patricia looked down at Kiana with barely concealed contempt. "Little girl, you should let the adults handle this." "I am handling it," Kiana replied. "Because the adults are lying." Simone put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, both restraining and supporting her. "Kiana." "No, Mom. She did this on purpose." Kiana turned to address the passengers around them, her voice gaining strength. "Does anyone else in this section have meals with expiration dates? Can you check your packaging?" People began examining their trays. A businessman across the aisle held up his pasta container. "Mine says November 2024. It's fresh." A woman 2 rows back called out, "Mine too. November 20th. Another passenger, an elderly white woman in row 25, slowly raised her hand. "Mine is also November 2024. All eyes turned back to Patricia, whose face had gone from pale to flushed red. "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped. "You people are always looking for something to complain about. Always trying to get free things, make a fuss." "You people?" David stood up now, his 6-foot frame suddenly imposing in the cramped space. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Patricia caught herself, but it was too late. The words had escaped and everyone had heard them. Everyone understood. Kiana felt a fire ignite in her chest. She'd learned about the civil rights movement in school. She'd read about Rosa Parks, about the Little Rock Nine, about children her age who had faced down hatred with nothing but courage. And now here she was in that same position. She thought about her great-grandmother who had lived through segregation, who had stories of being denied service, of being treated as less than human. And here was Patricia Hendricks in 2024, thinking she could get away with the same cruelty, just in a different form. "You gave my family expired food because we're black," Kiana said, her voice ringing through the cabin. "That's a hate crime. That's attempted assault. And that's going to land you in jail." Patricia's eyes went wide. She had underestimated this child, this family. She had thought they would be easy targets, that they would complain quietly and accept whatever explanation she gave. She had not anticipated this level of resistance, especially not from a 13-year-old girl. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" Patricia hissed, leaning down to get in Kiana's face. "You're just a child. You don't know what you're talking about. You're being dramatic, making up stories for attention. Typical behavior." "Typical behavior?" Kiana didn't back down an inch. "What's typical about expecting not to be poisoned on an airplane? What's typical about asking not to be discriminated against?" Simone pulled out her phone. "I'm documenting this. Every word. You can't record on an aircraft." Patricia reached for the phone. "Don't you touch my wife," David said, stepping between them. "And yes, we absolutely can record. This is evidence of a crime." Other passengers began pulling out their phones. The businessman across the aisle was already filming. A young woman 2 rows back had her camera pointed directly at Patricia. Patricia realized she was cornered. Cornered by a child, by a family, by the very people she had thought she could victimize without consequence. Her breathing became rapid and panic flashed across her face. She did what people like her always do when confronted with their own hatred. She doubled down. "You know what? I'm calling the captain. You're being disruptive and threatening." You're going to be removed from this flight and met by authorities when we land. Please do call the captain, Simone said coolly. I'm sure he'd love to know that one of his flight attendants is serving contaminated food to passengers based on their race. Patricia spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit, her hand trembling as she reached for the phone to call the captain. But before she could pick it up, another flight attendant, a young black woman named Jasmine, intercepted her. Jasmine had been working in the forward galley and had heard the commotion. She'd also noticed earlier, during meal prep, that Patricia had pulled specific trays from a back storage area, trays that weren't part of the standard service cart. Jasmine had thought it was odd but hadn't questioned it. Now, everything clicked into place. Patty, what's going on back there? Jasmine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Nothing. Just some passengers causing trouble. They're claiming their food is expired. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Show me the meals you served them. I don't have to show you anything. I'm senior to you. Then I'll go look myself. Jasmine brushed past Patricia and walked quickly to row 27, where the Mitchell family still stood, surrounded by supportive passengers. Jasmine introduced herself and asked to see the meal trays. When she examined the expiration dates, her face went ashen. She looked at Kiana, at her little brother Terrell who was now holding his stomach and looking pale, at the parents who were trying to remain calm despite their fury. I am so sorry, Jasmine said, and there were tears in her eyes. This should never have happened. Never. She returned to the galley where Patricia stood, arms crossed defensively. Did you deliberately serve them expired meals? They're fine. It's just a date on a package. It's 18-month-old chicken. Jasmine's voice cracked. That child has already eaten it. He could die from food poisoning. Do you understand that? And you did this because... She couldn't even finish the sentence. Patricia's silence was answer enough. Jasmine picked up the phone and called the captain herself. Captain Morrison, this is Jasmine. We have a serious situation in the cabin that requires your immediate attention. A flight attendant has deliberately served expired food to passengers, and there may be racial motivation involved. Within 2 minutes, Captain Morrison emerged from the cockpit. He was a stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. He commanded respect just by his presence, and the cabin fell silent as he walked toward row 27. Captain Morrison examined the meal trays, checked the dates, and then looked at the fresh meals served to nearby passengers. His jaw tightened. He turned to Patricia, who had followed him and now stood at the edge of the galley, her face a mask of defiance crumbling into fear. Miss Hendricks, go to the rear galley and remain there until we land. You are suspended from service effective immediately. Jasmine, please attend to this family and ensure they have fresh meals and anything else they need. And get the first aid kit. I want the child checked out. He then turned to the Mitchell family. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Kiana, Terrell, I cannot express how sorry I am for what has happened on my aircraft. This is absolutely unacceptable and I assure you there will be serious consequences. We'll have medical personnel meet us at LAX to examine your son, and the airline will cover all medical expenses. I'll also be filing a full report with the FAA and law enforcement. Kiana looked up at the captain, this white man in authority who was actually listening, actually taking them seriously. It was such a stark contrast to Patricia's hatred that it almost made her cry. But she held her emotions in check. She wasn't done yet. Thank you, Captain, Kiana said. But I want to make sure this doesn't just disappear. I want to make sure she faces real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist and a transfer to another route. Captain Morrison looked at this brave young girl with something like awe. You have my word. And you'll have documentation of everything that happened here today. I'll make sure of it. If you're watching this and you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button. We need more people who are willing to speak truth to power just like Kiana did. As Captain Morrison returned to the cockpit and Jasmine brought fresh meals and water for the family, the other passengers began to react. The businessman across the aisle stood up and started a slow clap. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire section was applauding Kiana and her family. Some passengers were crying. Others were angry on their behalf, shouting support and condemnation of Patricia's actions. One elderly white woman from first class made her way back to row 27. She had silver hair and kind eyes, and she knelt down to speak to Kiana at eye level. Young lady, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I marched with Dr. King in the 60s. I have seen courage in many forms. But what you just did, standing up to that woman, speaking truth even when you were scared, that's the same courage. You reminded me why we marched. Why we fought. Because children like you deserve better. All children deserve better. Kiana felt tears finally spill down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman hugged her. "No, thank you. For reminding an old woman that the fight isn't over, and that the next generation is ready." Patricia remained in the rear galley, her world collapsing around her. 23 years of service, of hiding her prejudices behind smiles and policy, and it had all come crashing down because of a 13-year-old girl who refused to be silent. She thought about calling her union representative, about crafting a defense, about claiming it was an honest mistake. But she knew. She knew that every phone in that cabin had captured her words, her actions, her hatred. There was no talking her way out of this. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Jasmine stayed close to the Mitchell family, bringing them snacks, drinks, blankets, anything they needed. She apologized repeatedly, even though it wasn't her fault. Other passengers stopped by to offer support, to share their own stories of discrimination, to tell Kiana how proud they were of her. Taro started to feel better after drinking some water and getting fresh food in his system. The nausea passed, though Simone kept a close eye on him, her nurses training in full alert mode. David sat quietly, holding his daughter's hand, his mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if Kiana hadn't noticed the date, if she hadn't spoken up. When Flight 447 began its descent into Los Angeles, Captain Morrison made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to address what happened in the cabin today. An incident occurred that was completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values of this airline or the vast majority of our crew members who serve with integrity and respect. A flight attendant deliberately served expired food to passengers, and there is evidence this was motivated by racial bias. This crew member has been suspended and will face the full extent of consequences, both from the airline and from law enforcement. I want to personally apologize to the Mitchell family and thank them, particularly young Kiana Mitchell, for their courage in bringing this to light. Discrimination has no place in our skies or anywhere else. Thank you." The cabin erupted in applause again. Kiana felt her face flush with embarrassment and pride. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She just wanted to protect her family, to speak the truth. But somehow that had been enough. When the plane landed and taxied to the gate, the Mitchell family was asked to remain seated while other passengers deplaned. Medical personnel boarded to check on Taro, who was declared healthy but advised to monitor for symptoms over the next 48 hours. Airport police and airline executives came aboard to take statements and collect evidence. Patricia was escorted off the plane by security, her head down, her career over. As she passed row 27 for the last time, she didn't look at the Mitchell family. She couldn't bear to see the face of the child who had defeated her. The airline executives, two senior managers who had rushed to the airport when they received Captain Morrison's report, sat down with the Mitchell family. They apologized profusely, offered compensation, and promised a full investigation. But Kiana wasn't satisfied with apologies. "What about the other passengers she's probably done this to?" she asked. "How many other black families has she served bad food to? How many other people has she discriminated against?" The executives looked at each other uncomfortably. "We'll be reviewing her entire employment record and interviewing colleagues." "And you'll make the results public?" Kiana pressed. "You'll let people know what you found?" One of the executives, a woman named Margaret Chin, smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "You're quite something, young lady." "Yes, we'll release a statement about our findings and the actions we're taking to prevent this from happening again." "Good," Kiana said. "Because this isn't just about my family. It's about every family that flies on your airline. They deserve to feel safe. They deserve to be treated with dignity." David squeezed his daughter's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story went viral almost immediately. Videos from passengers' phones spread across social media with hashtags like #JusticeForKiana and #Flight447. News outlets picked up the story. Kiana and her family were invited to appear on talk shows, though they declined most of them, wanting to return to some semblance of normal life. The investigation revealed that Patricia Hendricks had a history of complaints from passengers of color, complaints that had been filed but not taken seriously. She had been moved between routes, given warnings, but never held accountable. The airline was forced to acknowledge systemic failures in their complaint handling and diversity training. Patricia faced criminal charges for reckless endangerment and civil rights violations. Her lawyer tried to argue that serving expired food wasn't a hate crime, but the mountain of evidence, her words on video, her history of complaints, witness testimony, made it impossible to deny. She eventually pled guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to probation, community service, and a permanent ban from working in the airline industry. But perhaps more importantly, Kiana's actions sparked a broader conversation. Other flight attendants and airline workers came forward with stories of discrimination they had witnessed or experienced. Airlines across the country were forced to overhaul their training programs, their complaint processes, and their accountability measures. Kiana returned to school a hero. Her classmates treated her like a celebrity. Her teachers used her story as an example in discussions about civil rights and standing up for justice. But Kiana herself remained remarkably grounded. When asked by her social studies teacher what she wanted people to take away from her experience, she said simply, that your voice matters. Even if you're young, even if you're scared, even if people tell you to sit down and be quiet, your voice matters. Use it. 6 months after the incident, the airline invited the Mitchell family to a ceremony where they unveiled new policies and training programs designed to prevent discrimination. They also announced the creation of the Kiana Mitchell Courage Award, given annually to employees who stand up against discrimination in the workplace. Kiana was asked to say a few words. She stood at the podium, still small for her age but somehow commanding the room, and she spoke from her heart. "When I was on that plane, I was scared," she began. "I was scared of being wrong, scared of making a scene, scared of what would happen if I spoke up. But I was more scared of staying silent. I was scared of what would happen to my little brother if he got sick. I was scared of letting someone get away with treating us like we were less than human. And I realized that sometimes being scared isn't a reason not to do something. Sometimes it's the exact reason you should." She paused, looking out at the audience of airline executives, employees, and media representatives. "What happened to my family happens to people every day in big ways and small ways. People are judged by the color of their skin, by their religion, by where they come from, by who they love. And too often we see it happening and we look away because it's uncomfortable, because it's not our problem, because we're scared of getting involved. But it is our problem. All of us. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Dr. King said that, and it's still true today. The room was silent, hanging on every word. So I guess what I want to say is this: if you see something wrong, say something. If you see someone being treated unfairly, stand up for them. If you're the person being discriminated against, know that you have the right to speak up, to demand better, to expect dignity and respect. Don't let anyone tell you you're being dramatic or sensitive or making things up. Trust yourself. Trust your worth. And use your voice. The applause was thunderous. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Simone and David watched their daughter, overwhelmed with emotion. They had raised her to be strong, to be confident, to stand up for herself and others. But seeing her actually do it, seeing her take on an adult who had power and authority and come out victorious, it was beyond anything they could have imagined. That night, back in their hotel room, the family sat together on the couch, exhausted but happy. Terrell was playing a video game, fully recovered and already back to his normal energetic self. Simone and David sat with Kiana between them. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," David said quietly. "Not just for what you did, but for who you are. You showed more courage in 10 minutes than most people show in a lifetime," Simone added, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Kiana smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. "Mom, Dad, do you think it'll really change anything? Like really?" It was the question that had been haunting her since the incident went viral. She had received thousands of messages of support, but she had also received hate mail. She had seen comments online saying she was lying, that she was playing the race card, that nothing she did would matter because people like Patricia would always exist. David considered his answer carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "that change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in choices, in people like you deciding to speak up instead of staying silent. Patricia got away with her behavior for 23 years because people didn't speak up, because complaints were ignored, because the system protected her. But you broke through that. You made it impossible to ignore. And that matters. Will it stop every racist person from doing racist things?" Simone asked rhetorically. "No. But it might make the next Patricia think twice. It might make airlines take complaints seriously. It might inspire another kid in another situation to be brave. And those small changes over time, they add up to something bigger." Kiana nodded slowly. "I hope so. I really hope so. You know what I think?" Terrell piped up, not looking away from his game. "I think you're like a superhero. But instead of powers, you just have being really smart and really brave." Kiana laughed, the tension breaking. "That's the lamest superpower ever." "Nah," Terrell grinned at her. "It's actually the best one." As the months turned into a year, the impact of Kiana's actions continued to ripple outward. The airline industry implemented new standards for food safety and complaint handling. Civil rights organizations used her story in their training materials. Schools invited her to speak to students about courage and advocacy. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was the one that couldn't be measured in policies or programs. It was the young black girl in Chicago who stood up to a teacher who made a racist comment. It was the teenager in Texas who reported a store manager for following black customers. It was the college student in New York who organized a protest against discriminatory housing practices. All of them cited Kiana's story as their inspiration. All of them had found their own courage in her example. Kiana herself went on to have a normal teenage life, or as normal as possible after becoming a minor celebrity. She joined her school's debate team and excelled. She volunteered with civil rights organizations. She maintained good grades and dreamed of becoming a lawyer, wanting to fight injustice through the legal system. But she never forgot that day on Flight 447. She kept the expired meal packaging, sealed in a clear plastic bag as a reminder. Not of what happened to her, but of what she did about it. A reminder that one person, one voice, one moment of courage could make a difference. And sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would think about all the other Kianas out there, all the other kids and adults who face discrimination every day. She would think about the ones who spoke up and the ones who didn't, the ones who were heard and the ones who were ignored. And she would renew her commitment to use her voice, her platform, her story to make sure that more people were heard, that more injustices were addressed, that more courage was inspired. What would you do if you witnessed something like this happening? Would you have the courage to speak up like Kiana did, or would you stay silent? Let us know in the comments below. Because in the end, that's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. It's standing up when it's easier to sit down. It's speaking when it's safer to stay silent. It's being 13 years old on an airplane and refusing to accept injustice, even when the person perpetrating it has all the power and authority. Kiana Mitchell taught us that lesson at 30,000 feet. And the world is better for it. In the face of bias and injustice, courage and determination don't just sometimes win, they must win. Because people like Kiana, people who refuse to be silent, people who demand better, people who believe in their own worth and the worth of others, those people are the ones who change the world. Not through grand gestures or superhuman abilities, but through simple, powerful acts of standing up and saying, "This is wrong and I won't accept it." That day on Flight 447 started with expired food and a racist flight attendant's cruel plan. It ended with a suspended employee, new airline policies, criminal charges, and a 13-year-old girl who showed the world what true courage looks like. But more than that, it ended with a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, to fight injustice, to create change. We just have to be brave enough to use it.